Here we go then, folks. This is it. The best of the best. The cream of the crop. The greatest PlayStation 1 games of all time in my collection. Let's get it. Hello again, folks, so welcome back to the fourth and final part of my complete PlayStation 1 collection. What a journey it's been so far, but we have reached our final destination. The very best PlayStation 1 games in my collection. These are the gems, the rarities, the expensive games, and just the games that mean the most to me, because the PlayStation 1 has been and always will be one of my favourite consoles to collect for. The PlayStation 1 was one of the very first consoles I started collecting for about 5 or 6 years ago, and for that reason I was really lucky to be able to pick up a lot of these games for cheap. With retro gaming, the older the game gets, the more expensive it normally gets. Of course, there are exceptions to this rule, but normally the older the console gets, the harder it gets. Those games get into the hands of collectors and are not on the market. So I've been really lucky to build this massive PlayStation 1 collection. It is far from over, but I really want to show you these absolute gems. So let's get into it. The best PlayStation 1 games I own. Just before we jump into my final PlayStation 1 collection video, I just want to remind you folks, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and please subscribe, as I put new videos out every Saturday live at 5, as well as bonus content like this one, and I really want you folks along for the ride. Now, check out these PS1 gems. Here we go then, the final part of this series. Normally I'd be putting all the games into genres, but this time they're all bangers. So we're going to jump straight in with what I think is a hidden gem, In Cold Blood. I don't hear enough people talk about this game. Yes, it may have its faults. It's a little bit complicated. The controls aren't fantastic. But this is essentially if Resident Evil and Metal Gear Solid had a baby. This is from the people who made the Broken Sword games. And this is a pretty cheap game for the PlayStation 1. Unfortunately, they do not sell this on CX's website anymore. But eBay or your local game shop, you can probably pick this one up pretty cheap, and I definitely recommend checking this one out. The PlayStation 1 started so many iconic franchises, and you're going to see a lot of them in this video. But one series I think most people have forgotten about is Legacy of Kane Soul Reaver. This was such a good kind of third-person action kind of horror game. It's like definitely one of the more adult games, which is what we saw a lot more on the PlayStation 1. And I think this is really a franchise. It's a shame this slowly died like over the years, but for me this is where the Legacy of Kane series was at its best. And best thing about this game, it does have a lenticular cover. The PlayStation 1 had so many good platform games, but more about them later on. But one I don't hear people talk about quite as much is Pandemonium, made by Crystal Dynamics, the people who made the Gex games. This was a really solid platform game, which, let me know if this is true in the comments down below, I feel most people just played the demo of and not the full game. But check it out, it's definitely worth checking out this game. Again, it's not super expensive yet, so if it's one you want to add to the collection, do it sooner rather than later. The PlayStation 1 had a fair number of kind of cute 2D side-scrolling platform games. It also had its amazing mix of horror and survival horror games, but I think this could be one of the most terrifying games on the PlayStation 1. Heart of Darkness. This is a game which, let me just check, is unsuitable for ages 3 to 10. So if you're 11 years old, you could supposedly play this game. This game has some of the most brutal, disturbing deaths of all time. And it's the fact it's a little kid that is getting ripped apart, drowned, burned, electrocuted. But I digress. This is a fantastic game. It is pretty tough, but one of the coolest things is if you get a complete copy of this game. So, of course, it comes with 2 discs. Spoiler alert, it comes with 3D glasses. Also, it comes with the manual as well. It is definitely worth searching out a boxed, complete version of this, and it needs to have those 3D glasses. Sony really does have a habit for letting franchises die, and one of the PlayStation 1 franchises which I really think they need to bring back is Ape Escape. This was a super cool game and was really different from a lot of games around at the time. This game, you may see, looks a little bit different. I think I picked this up off eBay. Didn't have any kind of specific listings to it, but it is in fact a rental copy. So I'm not really sure where this came from. Looking at it myself, I would say Blockbuster, but if you can tell where this game would have come from, please let me know down in the comments. This game really needs bringing back, be it a remaster or a re-release. They could put these two games on a disc today and I would definitely buy it. Fear Effect. This game was the dream for teenage boys everywhere. It was violent, it had softcore pornography, it was everything cool, and it was exactly what the PlayStation 1 stood for. And it was also about pushing limits. The graphics and FMV sequences in this game were absolutely incredible. That's why it needed not 2, but 4 discs. But trust me, this game is definitely worth picking up. It's not too expensive now, but I could see in the future this one and its sequel getting very expensive. The phrase iconic is thrown around a lot when we talk about PlayStation 1 games, but I don't think there's many more games that are more iconic than Abes Odyssey and Abe's Exodus. For a lot of people, these were the first games they would have played on the PlayStation 1. These were on a lot of the early demos. Even Demo 1, which came packaged with a lot of the consoles. This was a game that I always found very difficult. It had a pretty brutal difficulty and some of the puzzles were very hard to solve. And don't forget kids, this was at a time when you couldn't just jump on YouTube or the internet to find out how to solve the problem. The PlayStation 4 had some of the best platform games of all time. They were trying to steal the crown from Mario and make the PlayStation 1 the place to be for platforming games. And it had 2 of the most iconic trilogies of all time. And the thing is, if you watch my previous episodes, you'll realise why there's only 2 of these games in this. So here we have Spyro 2 and Spyro 3 Year of the Dragon. That's because the original Spyro I only have on a platinum game, which is kind of annoying. Like, the completionist in me does realise I probably need the black label version of the original Spyro, but this is definitely one of the 2 most iconic platforming franchises on the PS1. Speaking of iconic and also ironic, the other big franchise of platformers on the PlayStation 1 that I have in my collection, Crash Bandicoot, I also have the 2nd and 3rd game on Black Label. That is of course because I have the very first game on Platinum once again. So let me know in the comments down below, would you settle to having the game on the Platinum release, or would you be looking for the Black Label of both Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon? There really isn't much more I can say about this game other than Metal Gear Solid. When people talk about the PlayStation 1, this is probably the first game that comes to mind for a lot of people. And if you are a PlayStation 1 collector, you need to have this in your collection. And I'm actually amazed it took me up to this year to find a copy. But there is a reason for this. I wanted to get a super minty copy, and this one is absolutely pristine. I picked this up from One Life Left gaming convention this year from Last Level Games, a local game seller, and I've been trying to find this in complete condition for a long while. I mean, all the booklets, but most importantly, when you open this up, as well as having all of the booklets inside, it needs to have the Silent Hill demo. Getting the game complete like this is getting harder and harder to find these days, and this is the kind of PS1 gem you want to find now for your collection, because these are going to get super expensive. Carrying on that theme of PlayStation 1 games and expensive games, and also carrying on from the demo of Silent Hill, we have Silent Hill. Perhaps the greatest survival horror game of all time, and this is a game that is getting more expensive all of the time. I think this has gone up £5 or £10 this year already, and this one is getting harder and harder to find, and I think this is going to get harder to find. As they are remastering Silent Hill 2, more people will be looking for the original to go back and play this, and as they bring out more Silent Hill games, that just makes people want to go back and play the old ones even more and just complete the collection. So trust me, now is the time to buy this game, as the prices are really going to go up. One of my favourite franchises of all times has only had 3 games, and only 2 of those games I consider to be absolute classics. I think the third one, which is on a different console, just doesn't stand up to the first 2. That game is on the Xbox, and these games are on the PlayStation 1. Dino Crisis and Dino Crisis 2. These are some of my favourite games of all time because they are survival horror action games akin to Resident Evil, but with dinosaurs. And even between these 2 games there are a lot of differences. Dino Crisis 1 is a lot scarier, it's a lot more atmospheric. Dino Crisis 2 is a lot more action packed. The kind of difference in these is like the difference Resident Evil took to make change in like 5 or 6 games. The difference between these 2 games is like the difference between Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 4. And these were only a few years apart. And for me though, Dino Crisis 2 is my favourite game. It is one of the games I have played through the most ever. I played through this game over and over again, getting better and better, unlocking more and more guns. And just like this horde mode at the end of this game is incredible. It has everything that you want from a game. It has like scary sections, puzzle sections, on-rail shooting sections, massive bosses. These are 2 of my favourite games of all time, and how these have not been remastered or even had a 4th game in the series, I have no idea. Next up we have probably the first game I ever stayed up all night playing. I remember in high school and one of my friends rented this game, and the very first night we played it the entire night. We didn't stop until the very next morning. And the funniest thing is, we didn't even do any missions. I'd never seen a game with this much freedom to do what you want, when you want, how you want, ever before. It just blew my mind that a game could have this much freedom. And that game was a small title called Grand Theft Auto. Yes, that was a single disc release, but here we have the Grand Theft Auto Collector's Edition. This collects all of the games that are on the PlayStation 1, and this thing is super mint. As you can see here, it has a cover which slides over the top, which a lot of people seem to miss. This is getting hard to find, and inside this thing is totally mint. It has all of the game discs and, more importantly, all of the maps. The thing is with these Grand Theft Auto games, they're getting harder to find complete with all of the maps, but that's what you want. You want to be able to look at that map and work out the next place you're going to explore. And that was the amazing thing about these games, the freedom to do whatever you wanted, and it was just changing the way we looked at video games. Here we go then, our final set of games, and to me these are the most iconic games on the PlayStation 1 and probably my favourite games on the PlayStation 1. I am of course talking about Resident Evil. So here we have the classic Black Label release and the kind of ickier looking value series for the PlayStation 1. This was one of the very first games again that I stayed up all night playing. That's because when my friend bought this game, we did not want to play it alone. From the first time we went through that corridor and those dogs jumped through the window, we knew this was scary. This was fear. This was a game to play in the dark, but to never play alone. I absolutely loved the original Resident Evil game. It is probably the game that made me fall in love with the PlayStation. From going from Nintendo consoles, this was dark and gritty and scary and adult. This was something I'd never seen before in video games, and I wanted more. It wasn't just your kind of traditional Resident Evil games we got though. We got games such as Resident Evil Survivor, which, to be fair, isn't the greatest Resident Evil game, but if you've never played it, this is somewhat of an oddity. It is a light gun game, but you also have to move around the levels, but this thing is janky. It controls pretty bad, but it has a really interesting storyline, which I won't spoil. If you don't want to like slog through the controls of this one, I definitely recommend watching a full playthrough on YouTube. It's definitely an interesting title in the Resident Evil universe. There is such a massive difference between the first Resident Evil game and Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, and for my money, this was the first game I ever played that had QuickTime events. You know, something was going to happen. You had to hit that button in time quickly or you were going to die. This game ramped up the intensity. Being attacked constantly by the Nemesis made this even more stressful. I'm not saying the previous Resident Evil games were like easy walks in the park, but this one turned up the horror. That constant sense of dread that you were being followed made this even scarier than Resident Evil. Here we go then, the end of 4 episodes, the final game of this 4-part series, and for me, possibly the most important single video game in my entire collection, because this is the game that started me collecting again. I wanted to go back and play this game after not playing it for years, and this was the first retro game I bought for my collection back around mid-2017, as I just had to replay this game, and this is where all of this started. This is how I was bitten by the bug. I could go back and buy and own all of my favourite childhood games. There was only one game I could start that with, and it was Resident Evil 2. Quite possibly my favourite game, not just on the PlayStation 1, but my favourite game of all time. This game is absolute perfection. You have to start off 2 separate games with 2 separate characters that interlink and just form an amazing storyline. But then you have the B games again for both characters. This is just absolute perfection. The action, the horror, the storylines, the twists, everything about this game is absolute perfection. And for me, this is the definition of PlayStation 1 memories. This is the game I think about sitting in my friend's house, reading the guides for, playing along, completing together multiple times. For me, this is the definition of what the PlayStation 1 was all about. There we have it then, folks. That is my complete PlayStation 1 collection. Across 4 episodes and hundreds of games, you have seen it all. But of course, it's not going to end there. I am constantly adding to this collection. And who knows, in a couple of years' time, we'll probably revisit the collection. It could be twice the size. But we are in a weird time for collecting for the PlayStation 1. As of now, CX is selling less and less PlayStation 1 games. And it's going to get harder to find these games. A lot of these games are over 20 years old now. And the thing is, it's only going to get harder. The thing is, once they're in a collection such as mine, I'm not letting these go. And there's only a finite number of these games. So I just want you to know, if you want to start collecting for the PlayStation 1, there is no better time than now. There we have it then, folks. That is my complete PlayStation 1 collection. And where do we go from here? Well, I want you to sound off in the comments down below. I want to do another console complete collection. So let me know in the comments down below which console from my collection you'd like me to go through next. Trust me, there is some massive collections. The PlayStation 1 isn't even the biggest collection I have. So let me know in the comments down below. Do you want to see PlayStation 2, Xbox, even the GameCube? Let me know. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please get involved in the comments. Please hit that like button, subscribe, and as always, keep playing the game. See y'all soon.